Rain hammered the diner's tin roof like a firing squad. Kaylee adjusted her apron, the heavy canvas straining against her wide waist, and wiped a smear of grease off her cheek. Then the front door burst open. 20 men, bleeding and battered, spilled straight into her quiet Friday night. Kaylee didn't scream. Screaming wasted energy, and at 2 in the morning, after 12 hours on her feet, she had absolutely none left. She stood behind the Formica counter, a solid, heavy woman rooted to the linoleum, thick thighs aching, back throbbing, watching the chaos unfold with the weary detachment of a woman who'd spent her entire adult life cleaning up messes made by men. A man stepped forward from the pack. He didn't look like a local trucker or a lost tourist. He wore a ruined bespoke suit, soaked through and plastered to his ribs, a dark, spreading stain of crimson ruining the fabric along his left side. Behind him, 19 more men crowded the narrow aisles of Kaylee's kettle, dripping mud, rainwater, and blood onto her freshly mopped tile. Their coats bulged awkwardly at the hips and shoulders. Guns. He gripped the edge of a vinyl booth to steady himself, eyes bruised, pitch black, utterly exhausted. "We need shelter. Please." His voice was a gravelly rasp, torn out of his throat. Not a demand. Not an order. A plea. Kaylee sized him up, then shifted her gaze to the men behind him, some leaning heavily against each other, leaving muddy smears across the wallpaper, one clutching his face with blood weeping through his fingers, another stumbling against the glass door, leaving behind a rusty handprint. She thought of her 6-year-old son, Toby, asleep in the trailer attached to the back of the kitchen. She thought of the single 12-gauge shotgun bolted under the register, holding exactly 2 shells. The men crowding her diner could probably start a small war. "Lock the door," Kaylee said. Her voice was flat, no tremor in it. The man in the ruined suit nodded once. A giant beside him, a bruised brute with a broken nose, slammed the deadbolt home and yanked the plastic blinds down hard. Kaylee turned away from all of them, grabbed a stack of clean white utility towels from beneath the register, and dropped the heavy bundle onto the counter. "Towels. Coffee's hot. You bleed on the upholstery, you're paying to replace it." The tension in the room, wound tight enough to snap a neck, broke instantly. The men collapsed into the booths, groaning, cursing in Italian and rough English, shedding wet jackets and heavy weapons onto the tabletops. The diner filled with the smell of wet wool, cheap metallic aftershave, and the sharp copper tang of fresh blood. Kaylee moved out from behind the counter. She didn't shrink from the violence pressing in around her. She took up space. At 250 pounds, she was a massive presence, and she carried her weight with the blunt, undeniable force of a bulldozer. She pushed past a young, terrified-looking kid holding a Glock, slapping his shoulder hard enough to make him flinch. "Put the toy away before you break my pie case, kid." She marched to the back room, grabbed the oversized industrial first aid kit, and kicked the swinging door shut behind her with a heavy orthopedic shoe. When she came back, the giant with the broken nose was pacing, barking frantic orders. "We need to secure the perimeter. Boss, they could be 5 minutes behind us. We need to move the cars round back. We need..." "You need to sit down and shut up," Kaylee cut in, her voice booming out of her deep chest without ever rising to a yell. The giant stopped, glaring at her, hand drifting toward his shoulder holster. "Excuse me?" Kaylee stepped right up to him. She didn't have his height, but she had a wide, immovable center of gravity, and she didn't flinch. "You are scuffing my floors. You are yelling in my building. And your boss is bleeding all over my meatloaf special sign. Move the cars." "Fine. But do it quietly. I've got a kid sleeping in the back. Anyone wakes him up, I shoot them myself. Understood?" The giant stared at her, stunned by the sheer audacity of this heavyset, exhausted waitress in a stained apron, then looked back to the man in the suit for guidance. "Do what she says, Matteo," the leader murmured, coughing into his fist. Matteo scowled, grabbed 2 men, and slipped out the back to move the vehicles. Kaylee turned her attention to the leader. He'd slumped into a booth, head resting against the cool glass of the window. Up close, he looked older than she'd first guessed, maybe early 40s, silver dusting his dark temples. Shirt off, she ordered, dropping the first aid kit onto the table with a heavy thud. He looked up at her, a weak, cynical smirk tugging at his pale lips. Buy me dinner first. You're in a roadside diner, buddy. Best I can do is day-old chili. She didn't smile back. Her face stayed set in stone. Take it off before you bleed out on my linoleum. I just waxed it Tuesday. He grimaced, peeling the wet, ruined jacket and shirt from his ribs. A bullet had grazed him, carving a nasty, jagged trench along his side, not fatal, but deep, angry, and messy. Kaylee snapped on a pair of blue latex gloves, her thick fingers, calloused from years of scalding dishwater and hauling boxes, surprisingly deft. She poured raw antiseptic onto a thick gauze pad. This is going to burn, she stated, leaning her full weight forward, pressing the pad hard into the wound. He didn't flinch. His breath hitched, jaw locking tight, but he didn't pull away. He just watched her face. Dominic, he rasped. Kaylee. She taped the gauze down tight, the tear of medical tape sharp in the quiet. Who's hunting you, Dominic? People you don't want to know. People who don't care if you're a bystander. Fair enough. Kaylee peeled off the bloody gloves and tossed them into a nearby wastebasket. There's a massive pot of chili in the back. You boys look like you haven't had a hot meal since Tuesday. $10 a bowl. Dominic actually laughed. It ended in a wet cough that speckled his lips with red, but the amusement was real. He reached into his damp trousers with his good hand, pulled out a sodden, heavy money clip, and dropped a thick stack of $100 bills straight onto the sticky tabletop. Keep the change. Kaylee stared at the money. Thousands of dollars. More than the diner grossed in 3 months. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She calmly scooped it up and stuffed it deep into her apron pocket. Chili's coming. She spent the next 90 minutes acting as both battlefield medic and short-order cook, hauling massive steel pots of food out of the walk-in fridge, broad back straining, thick arms flexing under the weight, slapping steaming bowls down in front of hardened men who looked like they killed people for sport. They ate like starving dogs. Nobody complained about the spice. Nobody sneered at the cheap crackers. And more importantly, nobody looked at her with that familiar mix of pity, disgust, and invisible dismissal she usually got from the regular truckers and travelers passing through. They just looked grateful. They stayed out of her way. They respected her space. By 4 a.m, the storm outside had worsened, thunder masking the sounds of men shifting and snoring across the booths. Most of them were asleep, heads resting on the tables or leaning against the foggy, rain-streaked windows. Kaylee stood behind the counter, plunging her hands into a sink full of scalding, soapy water, washing the mountain of dirty bowls, the heat sinking into her stiff, aching joints. Dominic walked up to the counter, moving stiffly, favoring his tightly bandaged side. He dug through the diner's lost and found box and emerged in a faded, tourist trap yellow t-shirt, a size too small, stretched tight over his broad chest, making him look ridiculous, and somehow still dangerous. He slid onto a bar stool, the old vinyl squeaking loudly in the quiet room. You move exceptionally well for a woman your size, he said. Not an insult, no sneer in it at all. Flat, clinical, the observation of a man who studied how people moved for a living. Kaylee kept scrubbing. Gravity and I have an understanding. I carry the weight, and it keeps my feet firmly on the floor. Keeps me from floating off on dreams. You aren't scared of us. I'm a single mother running a failing cash-only business on a forgotten stretch of dead highway. She rinsed a ceramic bowl hard and slotted it into the drying rack with a clatter. I'm scared of the IRS. I'm scared of the state health inspector. I'm scared the roof caves in next winter. You boys are just a mess I have to clean up tonight. Dominic leaned his elbows on the laminate counter, watching her hands move in the soapy water. Most people see 20 armed men kicking in their front door at 2 a.m, they panic. They scream. They don't offer chili. Panic doesn't pay the electric bill. She dried her hands on a ragged towel and leaned against the counter to face him, her soft stomach pressing comfortably against the edge of the wood. She didn't try to suck it in. She didn't cross her arms to hide her sighs. She'd stopped apologizing for the space she took up in the world a long time ago. Besides, you said please. Monsters don't say please. Don't kid yourself, Kaylee. We are absolutely monsters. Maybe. But tonight, you're just stray dogs out of the rain. A sudden noise came from the dark hallway leading to the back door. Dominic's posture changed instantly, spine straightening, right hand dropping to his waistband, where he'd tucked away a newly acquired pistol. Kaylee laid a heavy, wet hand flat over his forearm. Easy, killer. A small figure appeared in the doorway. Toby. Oversized, faded Batman pajamas, a ratty, one-eared stuffed rabbit clutched in one hand. He rubbed his eyes, blinking sleepily at the harsh fluorescent lights in the room full of battered, sleeping giants. Mom? His voice was thin, tired, and it cut straight through the silence. Kaylee stepped around the counter, not running, but moving with absolute, unwavering purpose. She knelt in front of her son, bad knees popping loudly in the quiet, and gathered him into her large, soft arms, pressing his face into her shoulder. Hey, Bug, she whispered, her cynical tone gone entirely. What are you doing out of bed? Thunder woke me up. Toby peeked over her shoulder at Dominic. Who are they? Just some travelers waiting out the storm. Kaylee stood, lifting him with a heavy grunt. He was getting too big, too heavy to carry, but right now she needed him off the floor, safe against her chest. She settled his weight onto her wide hip with practiced ease. Dominic watched the exchange in silence. The hard, violent lines of his face softened just slightly. He looked at Kaylee not with the predatory, sizing up gaze most men gave a woman, but with the weary, profound respect of a general recognizing a fellow commander holding a line. She was a fortress. Solid. Immovable. Fiercely protective. I'll put him back to bed, Kaylee told him, her voice sliding back into its businesslike monotone. Don't touch the register. She walked away, Toby's head resting heavy on her shoulder. When she came back 15 minutes later, Dominic was exactly where she'd left him, staring into the black dregs of his coffee. He's a good kid, Dominic noted. He's all I've got, Kaylee replied, sliding back behind the counter. She poured herself a mug of black, sludgy coffee and settled onto the reinforced wooden stool by the register, which creaked ominously under her weight. She took a sip, the bitter, burnt liquid scorching her throat in a good way. His father walked out when Toby was 2. Packed one duffel bag. Said he didn't sign up for the quiet life. Said I let myself go? She let out a dry, cynical bark of a laugh with no humor in it at all. I didn't let myself go. I just grew to fit the heavy load I had to carry by myself. Dominic turned his head slowly, his dark, bruised eyes locking onto hers. There was no pity in them at all. A man who walks away from a sturdy fortress just because he doesn't like the look of the bricks is a fool who deserves to die out in the open. Kaylee swallowed hard, nearly choking on her coffee. The compliment caught her completely off guard. It wasn't flowery. It wasn't sweet. It was brutal, practical, and honest. We leave before sunrise, Dominic said, breaking the heavy silence, staring out at the black rain. We won't bring trouble to your front door. Trouble's already here, Dominic. It came in with the rain. Then we'll wash it away when we leave. He reached out, his rough, heavily scarred fingers brushing lightly against her thick wrist on the counter. I owe you, Kaylee. I don't ever forget my debts. Kaylee looked down at his hand on hers. It felt incredibly hot against her skin. Just don't get killed out there on the highway. I hate finding out my regulars died. We aren't regulars. You bought a $10 bowl of chili for $3,000. You're a regular now. Dominic smiled again, genuine, quiet, dangerous. Then I guess I'll have to come back. Morning crept over the eastern ridges, painting the bruised sky ugly shades of gray and yellow. The storm had finally burned itself out, leaving a thick, suffocating fog rolling off the wet asphalt. Inside the diner, exhaustion gave way to a coiled, lethal anticipation. Men checked magazines, slides racked back with sharp metallic clacks. Kaylee cracked 36 eggs onto the sprawling flat-top grill, the sizzle masking the sound of violence being readied in her own boots. She moved with practiced, heavy efficiency, scooping mounds of sizzling hash browns, wide hips bumping the counter as she plated a massive breakfast. If these men were going out to die, they'd do it on a full stomach. Mateo stood by the front window, peeling back a millimeter of plastic blind. Headlights, he grunted. 3 SUVs, no plates, moving slow. Dominic stood. The yellow tourist t-shirt was stained with fresh coffee, but his posture was granite. He didn't look at his men. He didn't have to. 19 bodies moved in flawless, terrifying synchronization. Guns drawn. Safeties clicking off, echoing off the tin ceiling. Kaylee. Dominic's voice was quiet, utterly devoid of panic. Get the boy. Go to the walk-in freezer. Now. Kaylee wiped her greasy hands on her apron, glanced once at the heavy wooden kitchen door, then at the front windows. She didn't argue. She moved, not running. Running was for prey, but her heavy boots slammed the floorboards with urgent, driving force. She threw open the trailer door. Toby was already awake, clutching his rabbit, sensing the dangerous electricity bleeding through the walls. She scooped him up, 60 pounds of kid feeling like nothing against the sudden rush of cold adrenaline, and carried him into the kitchen, kicked open the heavy insulated door of the walk-in fridge, and set him down on a crate of cabbage. Stay here, Bug, she commanded, handing him her cell phone. Play the block game. Do not come out until I open this door. You hear me? Toby nodded, wide eyes glowing in the pale light of the screen. Kaylee shut the heavy freezer door and walked to the front register. She didn't hide. She reached beneath the counter, thick fingers curling around the cold, worn walnut stock of the 12-gauge, and rested the heavy barrel on the Formica. Dominic looked back at her, dark eyes widening a fraction. I told you to hide. It's my diner. Kaylee racked the pump, the heavy cha-chunk deafening in the quiet. Nobody shoots up my pie case without paying for it. Tires crunched on gravel outside. Doors slammed. Heavy boots slapped through puddles in the parking lot. They're flanking, Mateo warned, pressed flat against the doorframe. Dominic drew his weapon and looked at Kaylee one last time. Keep your head down, stubborn woman. The front window shattered, not cleanly, but exploding inward in a chaotic rain of jagged glass and splintered wood. The noise was absolute, a physical pressure that punched the air right out of Kaylee's lungs. She ducked, dropping her heavy body behind the reinforced steel of the counter. Bullets tore through the vinyl booths, chewed up the laminate tables, ripped through the coffee machines in a burst of steam and flying plastic. Dominic's men returned fire, not a panic spray, but measured, clinical, devastating, short-controlled bursts and barked orders in Italian. Kaylee kept her head tucked against her knees, broad back pressed to the cabinets, breathing through her mouth, tasting cordite and burnt coffee. A man kicked the front door open, shotgun raised. Before his foot fully hit the linoleum, Mateo stepped out from behind the jukebox and put 3 rounds in his chest. The man folded backward into the rain. Push out. Dominic roared over the din. Don't let them pin us inside. The men surged forward like a tide of black water, through the shattered window frame and the open door, carrying the fight into the muddy parking lot. The gunfire shifted outside, muffled by the walls, echoing off the surrounding hills. Kaylee stood up, ignoring the ringing in her ears, ignoring the glass crunching under her orthopedic shoes, and leveled the shotgun at the open doorway, arm steady, stance unshakable. She waited. 2 minutes passed. The gunfire slowed to sporadic pops, then died out completely. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise had been. A shadow fell across the doorway. Kaylee's finger tightened on the trigger. Dominic stepped into the frame. His yellow shirt was speckled with dark spots. A fresh cut bled over his left eyebrow, but his posture was relaxed. He looked at the ruined dining room, the shredded upholstery, the shattered pie case, then at Kaylee, standing massive and unbothered behind the counter with a shotgun trained on his chest. "Put it away, Kaylee." He wiped rain and sweat from his face, breathing hard. "It's over." 3 months later, summer baked the highway in a shimmering haze of heat. Kaylee's kettle looked completely different. The shattered front windows had been replaced with thick, heavy-duty panes. The cheap vinyl booths were now rich, dark leather. The leaky tin roof had been patched, sealed, and freshly painted. Kaylee hadn't spent all the money Dominic left on the counter that morning, or the thick manila envelope Mateo had silently handed her before the black SUVs finally rolled out of her lot. She'd put most of it into a trust for Toby, but she'd fixed her fortress. She stood behind the counter chopping onions, still in the same heavy canvas apron, still carrying 250 pounds on her frame. She hadn't bought new clothes. She hadn't tried to shrink herself. She existed exactly as she was, a solid, immovable fixture in a chaotic world. The little bell above the new door chimed. Kaylee didn't look up right away, scraping diced onions into a steel bowl with the flat of her blade. "Take a seat anywhere, honey. Coffee's fresh. I'll take the booth in the back. Away from the windows." The voice was a low, gravelly rasp that sent a sudden, hot spike of adrenaline straight up her spine. She dropped the knife. It clattered against the cutting board. She looked up. Dominic stood in the entryway. He looked healthier, the bruising gone, the exhausted pallor replaced by a sharp, wealthy vitality. He wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than her trailer, fitted perfectly to his broad shoulders. No blood this time. He walked slowly across the pristine, freshly waxed floor, completely alone. No 19 men behind him. Kaylee wiped her hands on a towel, feeling a strange, heavy flutter in her chest, a sensation she hadn't felt in nearly a decade, and crushed it down instantly. She wasn't a blushing teenager. She was a 40-year-old woman with stretch marks and a bad knee. "You replaced the floors," Dominic observed, sliding into the back booth. "Bullet holes are hard to mop around," Kaylee replied, her voice steady and dry. She grabbed a ceramic mug and a heavy pot of black coffee, walked out from behind the counter, not trying to walk lightly, her boots thumping solidly with every step, and poured. Dominic watched her hands. "Your men didn't come in to terrorize my customers today," she said, setting the pot down. "My men are 3 miles down the road, sitting in air-conditioned cars," Dominic said, taking a sip of scalding coffee and closing his eyes briefly. "I told them I was having lunch alone." "It's 3 in the afternoon, Dominic. Lunch rush is over." "Then I guess I'm early for dinner." He looked up at her, his dark eyes dragging over her broad shoulders, her thick waist, her wide hips, not the dismissive, invisible look men usually gave her, but a heavy, anchoring gaze. The look of a man who recognized shelter when he saw it. "Why are you here?" Kaylee asked, crossing her thick arms over her chest. "I told you. I always pay my debts." He held her gaze. "You left $50,000 in cash in a greasy envelope. The debt is paid. You bought the diner 10 times over." Dominic shook his head slowly. "Money pays for the chile, Kaylee. It pays for the bandages and the broken glass. It doesn't pay for the woman who stared down 20 armed men and told them to wipe their feet. It doesn't pay for the woman who pulled a shotgun to protect my back." Kaylee scoffed, shifting her weight. "I was protecting my kid. You protected both of us." He reached across the table, didn't grab her wrist this time, just laid his hand flat on the cool laminate, palm up. "An open invitation. My world is fragile, Kaylee. Everyone in it is thin paper, ready to tear. They break under pressure. They run when the rain starts." He met her cynical, guarded eyes. "You don't run. You don't break. You just hold the line." Kaylee stared at his hand, a scarred, violent hand that commanded empires and ended lives, then at the man wearing a bespoke suit, sitting in a roadside diner just to talk to a tired, heavy-set waitress. It defied all logic. It was stupid. But Kaylee was tired of carrying the entire world on her own heavy shoulders. Slowly, deliberately, she uncrossed her arms, reached out, and placed her wide, calloused hand over his. His fingers curled upward, gripping hers with startling, desperate strength. Not a fairy tale touch. A firm, grounded, unbreakable grip between two survivors. "I'm not a trophy, Dominic," she warned, her voice dropping to a rough whisper. "I don't wear silk. I don't go to galas. And I don't shrink myself for any man's ego." Dominic's lips curved into that dangerous, genuine smile. "If I wanted a trophy, I'd have bought one. I need a fortress. I need you exactly as you are." He stood, pulling her slightly closer. He didn't tower over her. They met almost eye to eye, and reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a heavy iron key. He set it on the table beside their locked hands. "I bought the 40 acres of land behind the diner," Dominic said quietly. "Nobody will ever build there. Nobody will ever encroach on your space. And whenever the world gets too loud, this is exactly where I'm coming to hide." Kaylee looked at the key, then up into his bruised, weary eyes, feeling the heavy, cynical armor around her heart crack, just a fraction. "Well," she murmured, her thumb brushing over his scarred knuckles, "I suppose I can start keeping a fresh pot of chili in the back. Just in case." Dominic leaned in and pressed a slow, heavy kiss to her forehead, treating her like royalty. "Forged in iron. I'm counting on it. Morning, everyone." If you want to support this channel and hear more deeply human, unfiltered stories like Kaylee and Dominic's, hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who knows what it means to hold the line, and don't forget to subscribe. Turn on those notifications so you never miss a gritty, emotional ride. Your support keeps the stories coming. See you in the next one.